Welcome back to the Garland Farms channel. Please do subscribe, upvote, and share this video. Today we're going to debunk lifting vegan logic and his failed attempt at debunking the crop deaths though argument. Now let's get started.
Hey, what is up guys? So if you haven't seen, Garland Farms made a debunk video to my crop deaths though debunked video. So in this video, I'm going to be responding to the things he was saying in his video, but from a moral philosophy kind of perspective. Mainly because there is so much to clear up, especially about my moral system. So it is somewhat difficult to extract a specific argument from his video, but after watching it, there were really just two claims, not arguments, that I was able to extract. The first is that I am a moral hypocrite for being vegan, and the second is that the vegan lifestyle actually causes more deaths than a non-vegan diet, or the diet that Garland Farms consumes. I say a non-vegan diet or the diet that Garland Farms consumes because it wasn't too clear what he was actually comparing the vegan diet to. So depending on his response to this video, I may make a second video going over the actual empirics of what he was saying in his video fully. After watching this video though, you will understand why even going into the empirics of what he is saying in his video isn't actually needed to make the point I'm going to be making in this video. So although I just said I may make a second video responding fully to the empirical claims made in his video, before I go into the moral philosophy part of this video, I'm going to slightly touch on the empirics of his video because I'm sure some of you are interested in seeing that. So the sources he uses are pretty laughable, and the amount of sources in the caption is a nice representation of just how scholarly the sources he decided to use were in his video. Now, although some of the articles that he cited had cited scholarly sources, a lot of them did not have any. And I was also confused because at certain points in the video, he would make the claim that my lifestyle causes more deaths, exacts more suffering, and is destroying the planet, and then cited articles that didn't actually deductively prove that my lifestyle causes more deaths, exacts more suffering, and is destroying the planet. The first time he did it, he just cited an article about the culling of swans for the protection of crops, which has been approved of in Tasmania.
Actually, our argument is much more than simply pointing to your hypocrisy. It's actually pointing to the fact that your diet not only kills more animals, but also exacts more suffering, as well as destroys the planet.
Nowhere in this article was there a sort of comparative analysis of the deaths caused by a vegan diet and the deaths caused by a non-vegan diet, or whatever diet Garland Farms is proposing causes less deaths. Nor was there any sort of comparative analysis between the suffering caused by the vegan diet and his diet. And you guessed it, there was also nothing fully substantiating the claim that the vegan diet is destroying the planet. The second time he mentioned the vegan diet causing more deaths, exacting more suffering, and destroying the planet, he cited an article titled "A Preliminary Assessment of the Palate and Tongue for Detecting Organophosphorus and Carbamate Pesticide Exposure in the Degraded Carcasses of Vultures and Other Animals."
Again, it's more than simple hypocrisy because veganism, also known as the petroleum lifestyle, kills more animals, exacts more suffering, and is literally destroying the planet.
I skimmed through the article, and just like before, I couldn't find anything to substantiate the claim that the vegan diet causes more deaths, exacts more suffering, and is destroying the planet. So yeah, I'm unsure why he would cite this article and the article before while making these specific claims. Now, to the meat-eating ideologue anti-vegans that are sub to me, no, me calling his sources laughable and my going over of a couple of his empirical claims does not refute the entirety of the empirical claims made in his video. Like I said before, depending on his response to this video, I may make a part 2 video where I delve further into the empirical claims made by him. Alright, so now let's get into the moral philosophy part of this video, or, the main points I'm trying to make in this video. I just want to start with talking about the ethics of crop deaths first, but from a perspective of my moral preference to increase utility, which in part makes up my moral system, which is based in threshold deontology. So there was a weird assumption made by not just anti-vegans, but vegans as well, that crop deaths in the big scheme of things are even morally problematic to begin with. I have not seen somebody provide an argument that a crop field provides less utility and or causes more disutility than the state of the area of land prior. When we think about what the area of land was prior to being turned into a crop field, we understand that it was just the wild. In the wild, suffering and death is occurring to a massive degree. Sentient beings are being eaten alive, sometimes lower sentient beings are eating alive higher sentient beings, etc. Nature isn't really a beautiful thing, and it is filled with suffering and death. Now, to be clear, I am not making the claim that I know for certain that less utility was occurring in an area of land which has been turned into a crop field prior to it becoming a crop field and it being the wild. I would say I am actually agnostic on that potential fact. I am just trying to say that I have no reason to believe that turning an area of the wild where a massive amount of suffering was occurring into a crop field may not actually have caused a decrease in overall utility. And when we factor in utility gain from feeding civilization and causing civilization to prosper, I begin to side with the idea that replacing a couple acres of wilderness with a couple acres of crop fields may have actually caused an increase in utility. Why I decided to go into this will make a lot more sense in a couple of minutes. So there are multiple things that are happening when a person makes the kind of crop deaths though claim that Garland Farms is making, that kind of claim being that with respect to my vegan values, I am a moral hypocrite for supporting crop deaths. Number one, Garland Farms is making a claim about my values that crop fielding is a bad thing because it results in crop deaths. Multiple things here. First, he is going to need to understand what my ethics even are and the threshold I set for when an action becomes morally permissible. To make a claim of hypocrisy toward a person's actions, you should know what their values are so that you can come to the conclusion that the decision the person is making is in fact incompatible with their moral values. So, number one, Garland Farms needs to understand my values rather than just lump my values in with whatever he categorically thinks that vegans value. He needs to understand that I have a utility threshold when, if broken, causes an action to become morally permissible. The second thing he needs to establish is the empirical case that the utility net gain from converting multiple acres of wilderness to multiple acres of crop fields does not exceed my utility threshold. Because as I said before, I have a utility threshold when, if broken, causes an action, in this case crop deaths, to be morally permissible. So to be clear, he needs to make the case that crop deaths do not increase utility past my threshold. If that was confusing, here is an easier way to understand this in reference to my vegan values and the utility loss instead of utility gain from crop deaths. Garland in this video is trying to make the point that according to my vegan values, that the amount of utility loss from crop deaths is so much that I should not be supporting them. He needs to show that the net loss in utility from purchasing animal products, which I morally object to, is on the same level as the utility loss from crop production. And by the way, guys, do not worry, I'm going to cover his claims about the pasture-raised livestock causing less overall deaths than consuming a plant-based diet and causing crop deaths later in this video. Back to talking about utility gain from crop deaths. To reiterate, Garland needs to provide an empirical case for how the net gain in utility from converting wilderness to crop fields does not break my utility threshold for when an action becomes morally permissible. Now, I know what you may be wondering, Danny, how could you operate under veganism if you yourself said that you're agnostic about the utility gain or loss from implementing crop fields? Well, the thing is that although I may be agnostic under the specific aspect of veganism, I am not agnostic under the entire aspect of veganism. What I am certain of is that not buying animal products does cause a net gain in utility, which breaks my threshold. Buying animal products causes the breeding of animals who didn't exist prior to live in abhorrent conditions and torturous conditions, only to eventually be murdered around 1/4 of their natural lifespan. I think it's pretty obvious that not supporting this, aka a literal holocaust of billions of bred into existence beings, would increase utility. And let's also pretend we are like Garland Farms and think that crop deaths are immoral, which, by the way, again, I am agnostic on. So when we factor in all the crop deaths from crops grown for animals, plus the animals bred into horrific conditions to be exploited and killed, I think it is pretty obvious that a vegan diet increases utility in comparison to a non-vegan diet because the vegan diet does not support those specific things. My point here is that one can be agnostic about a small part of veganism, like the utility gain or loss from crop deaths, while being certain of another part or stronger part. This stronger part being the utility gain from not breeding animals into a miserable existence only to be murdered. If you're still confused on this, here's a small clip of Ask Yourself and Dr. Avi covering this concept.
I accept that veganism likely creates more utility or creates less disutility than animal agriculture. But I feel like if you're agnostic about crop deaths, you can't say that veganism doesn't cause overall some disutility.
Wait, on the net?
That's like saying that if you're uncertain about the utility effect of producing a wheel, then you have no. If you're agnostic about the wheel, then you have to be agnostic about like the car that it's part of.
Yeah,
right?
that's true. Is that not true?
Doesn't seem true to me. If you're agnostic about part of it, you can still have very strong reasons with respect to the rest of it. Like, say that you have like 5 factors and you're like, okay, this one clearly disutility, this one clearly disutility, this one clearly disutility, this one I'm uncertain about. It's like you still have the majority of the evidence there leaning in one direction, and then you have one thing you're agnostic about.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. But I'm talking about utility on the net. But
That's what my analogy is to do with, right? If you're looking at the net utility and you look at all the component parts and you have a clear view on a whole bunch of them, and then there's one you're uncertain about, you still have the evidence leaning very clearly in one direction.
Although I don't even think that Garland Farms made a strong case for pasture-raised animals causing less death than a vegan diet, let's just assume that he has. So let's assume that Garland Farms actually showed that there is a utility-raising action, pasture-raised farms in this case, which raises utility more than becoming a vegan. To be clear, in this scenario, going vegan raises utility, and Garland Farms' pasture-raised farms also raise utility, but more so than the vegan diet. Now, I am not a slave consequentialist or think that at every point in your life, you ought to do the thing which most maximizes utility. Here is an analogy. Imagine if I did a thing that raised utility, like donate to a specific charity, and we will analogize that specific charity with going vegan. And let's say there was another charity that I could have donated to, which increased utility more, and we can analogize that charity to Garland Farms' pasture-raised farms. Is it now the case that donating to that specific first charity is morally problematic? What if I find another charity that increases utility more than Charity 1 and Charity 2? What if I find another option that increases utility more than Garland's pasture-raised farms? This is the land of absurdity you enter in when you operate as a slave consequentialist, where you monitor every action you do, even actions that do increase utility, and say, okay, well, action A doesn't increase utility as much as action B, and therefore I ought to do action B instead of action A, even though action A did increase utility, hence make the world a better place. I've never met a person with this maximize utility at every turn moral system, but I would say with a fair amount of certainty that Garland Farms does not hold this view. And to the vegans listening, here's a way to understand how the slave consequentialism moral system would work within the confines of a vegan lifestyle. Take your current vegan diet you have now, we'll call it vegan diet A. Now imagine there was a vegan diet B, which was solely comprised of potatoes and bread, and this diet raised utility more than diet A, which again also raises utility. And let's also assume that this diet was healthy. This kind of slave consequentialism moral system would make it morally obligatory for you to drop your current vegan diet and consume vegan diet B. And to Garland Farms, operating under the slave consequentialism morality, I want to know, how many calories is he eating currently a day? Is he eating the minimum amount of calories which cause him to be healthy? Because if he's not maximizing well-being with his diet, because the less calories he consumes while remaining healthy, the less overall suffering and death he's causing, hence the more net gain and utility his lifestyle can bring. So to be consistent with this slave consequentialism approach to morality, he ought to consume the least amount of calories needed to be healthy daily. And I'm aware that Garland hasn't explicitly stated he has this slave consequentialism position, but he seems to be operating from it, and that is why I'm asking these questions. To clear everything up that has been covered, number one, Garland needs to first understand my moral system and where I set my utility threshold. Number two, Garland needs to provide an argument that the utility gain from not supporting crop deaths is at the same level, if not a higher level, than the utility gain from not supporting animal agriculture, which causes me to be vegan in the first place. Number three, in reference to Garland's point that I ought to take my first action, which causes an increase in utility, going vegan, and replace it with an action which increases utility further, like buying my food from his pasture-raised farms, he's going to need to provide an argument with strong evidence that supporting pasture-raised farms increases utility more than being vegan. But understand that even if he did, he needs to know that I don't take the position that actions which increase utility are morally wrong because there are other actions which raise utility more, which I could have done instead. Now let's talk a little bit about what Garland Farms' moral views are. He believes that pasture-raised farms are justified. In my crop deaths though debunked video, I already put name the trait to myself and said that I would accept crop deaths in the context of humans who were damaging crops and did not have the mental capacity to be reasoned with to stop damaging the crops. So I want to now put the question to Garland Farms, what is the trait or set of traits present in livestock animals which he breeds into existence, commodifies, exploits, and kills for food, which if were present in specific human beings, would justify doing the same thing to human beings? I'm unsure which traits he would name, but could you imagine if the trait he named was, I don't know, the lower cognition of livestock? Imagine Garland Farms breeding and farming mentally disabled humans of the same, if not lower intelligence as livestock, into existence on his pasture-raised farm and killing them for food and exploiting them and all that. Also, the reductio of this whole lower death count though argument is pretty odd. Imagine thinking it's moral to go and just murder a very obese person or a very muscular bodybuilder for food to live off of for once a year, solely because it causes less deaths than going vegan, which raises utility anyway. I personally find that absurd. And if you're wondering why I don't think that death count is always all that matters, I'll link a video with a timestamp where I go over why I personally don't only value death count when making moral decisions. Alright guys, that is the end of the video. Like I said before, depending on Garland Farms' response to this video, I might make another video going more into the empirical claims made in his video. Oh, and just one more thing that's kind of funny. At the beginning of Garland Farms' video on me, he actually zoomed in on my earrings, and this kind of reminds me of what Primal Edge Health did. He actually in the past used to mention my earrings, and this also kind of reminds me of when Primal Edge would be like, oh dude, I love your fade, I love your beard.
All right, so I don't know. I appreciate that you got a nice little fade going on there. Maybe the chicks at the club will like that. You got a nice little fade going on there. You got a nice little fade going on there. You got a nice little fade going on there.
So yeah, I'm not really sure what it is with these like anti-vegans, but they like to just, I don't know, attack appearance, and it's just really, I don't know, it's just weird. So yeah, apparently it's like morally wrong to like have earrings, as a male. I'm not really sure what the reasoning is, but I'd like to hear an argument for that as well, in case Garland Farms has a sort of like moral objection to, there being like a piece of metal on my earlobes. It's a really problematic thing and something that I think you should be pointing out in a discussion on morality, right? It just makes a lot of sense, very relevant. So anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoy my content and want to support me on Patreon, the link is in my description below. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.
Dude, even vegans don't get your weird, stupid wannabe sense of irony here. Who is your audience? Nobody gets these dumb jokes. Dude, even vegans don't get your weird, stupid